Clara thought her husband Alex was a mild-mannered failure, a freelance architect with small, insignificant projects, a man whose quiet nature she had mistaken for a lack of ambition. She didn't know that the simple, unassuming man sitting opposite her at the polished mahogany table of l'Étoile d'Or, enduring the casual condescension of her father, was the architect of a digital empire. She didn't know that his quietness was not weakness, but the profound calm of a man who controlled the very system processing the transaction for their ridiculously expensive meal. Within the hour, the world she had so carefully constructed on a foundation of wealth and status would not just crumble. It would be revealed as a phantom, a ghost she had built around a man she had never truly seen. The humiliation she was about to inflict upon him would boomerang with the force of a hurricane, and she would be left standing in the wreckage of her own arrogance. It's a story about how the quietest people can have the loudest impact, and how true power doesn't need to announce itself. If you enjoy stories where patience and integrity win the day, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. And I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment below and let's see how far this story travels. Now let's get back to that fateful dinner. The air in l'Étoile d'Or was thick with the scent of money and truffle oil. It was Richard's 65th birthday, and Clara's father, a man whose personality was as loud and imposing as his oversized gold watch, held court at the head of the table. He was a real estate magnate, a titan of brick and mortar, and he viewed Alex's profession in the nebulous world of digital blueprints and freelance contracts with a disdain he barely bothered to conceal. Seated to his right was Julian, Clara's brother, a slick, smirking echo of his father, already a vice president in the family company and possessing all of the arrogance with none of the foundational success. And then there was Alex. He sat quietly, his posture relaxed but attentive, a small island of calm in the turbulent sea of his in-laws' egos. He wore a simple, well-tailored navy blazer and a gray shirt, understated, elegant, and to Clara's increasingly critical eye, utterly boring. For 5 years she had tried to mold him, to encourage him to be more like them, more aggressive, more ostentatious, more concerned with the acquisition of things that could be seen and touched and envied. But Alex remained stubbornly himself, content with his small projects, his quiet evenings, and a worn, leather-bound notebook he carried everywhere. "So Alex," Richard boomed, wiping the corner of his mouth with a linen napkin, "still playing with your little drawings? I hear the Henderson project fell through. Pity. A man needs stability, a real job." Alex took a slow sip of water, his eyes calm. "The Henderson partnership wasn't the right fit, Richard. My firm is selective about its clients." Julian snorted into his wineglass. "Your firm? You mean you, in the spare bedroom?" Clara felt a familiar hot flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. This was the pattern. Every family gathering was a trial, a public weighing of her husband where he was consistently found wanting. She had hoped tonight would be different. She had bought a new dress, a shimmering emerald silk sheath that cost more than Alex probably made in a month, hoping it would act as a shield. But her family's judgment was impervious to fashion. "Julian, be nice," she said, her voice lacking any real conviction. She shot Alex a look, a silent plea for him to defend himself, to show some fire, to prove them wrong. But he just offered a small, placid smile. "The spare bedroom has excellent natural light," Alex replied, his tone even. "It's conducive to creative thinking." The remark, meant to be disarming, only added fuel to their derision. To them, his lack of outrage was proof of his weakness. He didn't fight back because he couldn't. He was a placid sheep in a family of wolves. The meal progressed along this same painful track, Richard boasting about a new acquisition, Julian bragging about a car, and Alex offering thoughtful but brief contributions that were promptly ignored. Clara felt herself shrinking in her chair, the silk of her dress feeling less like armor and more like a costume for a part she was growing tired of playing. The wife of a man who was falling behind. Finally, the ordeal was drawing to a close. The waiter, a man with a professionally detached demeanor, placed the heavy leather billfolder on the table. It landed with a soft, final thud. "I'll take care of it," Richard announced, reaching for it with a proprietary air. But Alex, for the first time that evening, moved with surprising speed. His hand covered the folder first. "No, Richard, it's your birthday. It's my pleasure." Richard raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Are you sure you can handle it, son? This isn't the corner diner." "I think I can manage," Alex said, his voice still quiet, but with an edge of firmness that was so rare it momentarily silenced the table. He opened the folder, glanced at the astronomical figure without flinching, and slid his credit card from his wallet. It was a sleek, black, minimalist card, devoid of any bank logo, bearing only his name and a small silver symbol, a stylized A. Clara watched, her stomach churning. She knew he had been saving for something, but this? This was a gesture born of pride, a foolish attempt to prove himself that was destined to fail. She felt a surge of anger at him for putting them in this position, for making a promise she was certain he couldn't keep. The waiter returned, took the card, and disappeared. The table fell into a tense silence. Richard tapped his fingers on the tablecloth, a smug, knowing look on his face. He was waiting for the inevitable humiliation. Julian smirked at his phone. Clara held her breath. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the waiter reappeared, his face a mask of polite discomfort. He approached Alex, bending slightly to speak in a low voice, though everyone at the table could hear. "I'm very sorry, sir," the waiter murmured, placing the card back on a small silver tray. "It has been declined." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Declined. Clara felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The blood rushed to her face, hot and shameful. This was it. The ultimate public failure. Richard let out a short, sharp laugh that was more of a bark. "Well, I'll be," he said, not even trying to hide his satisfaction. "Good intentions, Alex, but you need the capital to back them up." Julian looked up from his phone, his eyes wide with mock sympathy. "Tough break, man. Maybe try the one from the gas station next time?" Alex looked at the card, then at the waiter, his expression unreadable. "That's strange," he said calmly. "Would you mind trying it again? There must be a mistake with the terminal." The waiter hesitated. "Of course, sir." He took the card and walked away again, leaving a fresh wave of mortified silence in his wake. Clara couldn't bear it. She glared at Alex, her eyes blazing with a fury born of 5 years of accumulated frustration and public shame. "A mistake?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "The only mistake was you trying to play in a league you don't belong in, Alex. You knew you couldn't afford this. You just had to make a show of it, and now you've embarrassed all of us." Her words were sharp, intended to wound, to punish him for her own discomfort. But Alex simply met her gaze, his own eyes holding a deep, unreadable current. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look angry. He looked disappointed. The waiter returned, his expression even more pained than before. "I'm terribly sorry, sir. Declined again. The message says the account has been suspended by the primary user." The meaning was unmistakable. Clara felt a cold dread mixed with her anger. Before they had left the house, after another argument about their finances and his lack of drive, she had done something impulsive, something petty and cruel. She had logged into their joint banking portal, the one tied to his supplementary card, and in a fit of pique had frozen his access. She had meant it as a warning, a way to control his spending on what she saw as frivolous hobbies. She never imagined he would use it for something like this. She had done this. She had engineered her own husband's public humiliation. Richard leaned back, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "Suspended? Well, that's a new one. Clara, did you finally put a leash on his wallet? Clara couldn't speak. Her throat was tight with a toxic cocktail of guilt and righteous anger. She chose anger. It was easier. It was her shield. I had to, she snapped, her voice brittle. She refused to look at Alex, instead addressing her father. Someone has to be responsible. He's completely reckless. She reached into her own purse, pulling out her platinum card, a card provided by her father, and slapped it on the table. Here, she said to the waiter, her voice dripping with disdain. Use a card that actually works. She glanced at Alex, expecting to see him crushed, broken, ashamed. But he wasn't. He was looking down at his old leather notebook, which he had placed on the table beside his plate. He ran a single finger over the worn cover, a strange, contemplative look on his face. It was as if he wasn't in a Michelin-starred restaurant being eviscerated by his family, but somewhere else entirely, contemplating a complex problem from a great and unreachable distance. And in that moment, for the first time, a tiny, unnerving sliver of doubt pierced through Clara's certainty. She had assumed she knew everything about this man. What if she knew nothing at all? The humiliation wasn't a new sensation for Alex. It was merely a new vintage of an old and bitter wine. He had been tasting it in small sips for 5 years, ever since he had married into the formidable, monolithically wealthy world of Clara's family. He remembered their first anniversary when he had presented Clara with a first edition copy of her favorite novel, sourced through a network of rare book dealers over 6 months. He had been so proud. Richard had gifted her a new convertible, Julian a diamond tennis bracelet. His book, wrapped in simple brown paper, had been met with a polite but telling silence. How quaint, her father had remarked, before steering the conversation back to the car's horsepower. He remembered the family vacations, where he was always the odd one out. They spoke a language of assets, of mergers, of summering in the Hamptons and skiing in Gstaad. Alex spoke of structural integrity, of sustainable design, of the quiet beauty of a perfectly proportioned space. They saw his passion as a hobby, like a child's stamp collection, charming, but ultimately worthless in the real world, their world. Julian had once joked at a Christmas dinner that Alex's architectural firm was so boutique, its entire staff could fit in a phone booth. The joke had landed, and the laughter that followed was a physical blow. Clara, in the beginning, had been his defender. She had seen something in his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity. She'd told him she loved that he wasn't like her family, that he was grounded and real. But slowly, imperceptibly at first, the constant acid rain of her family's disapproval had eroded her admiration. Her defense of him grew weaker, more perfunctory, until it ceased altogether. It was replaced by a constant, low-level frustration. Why couldn't he just try harder? Why couldn't he network at her father's club? Why did he turn down a lucrative but soulless offer to design cookie-cutter, suburban McMansions for Richard's development company? It's not about the money, Clara, he had tried to explain one night, after a particularly grueling dinner with her parents. It's about creating something that lasts, something with meaning. Meaning doesn't pay the mortgage on a house in this neighborhood, she had retorted, gesturing around their beautiful home, a home her father had provided the down payment for, a fact he never let either of them forget. My friends' husbands are partners at their firms. They're VPs, they're something. What are you, Alex? You're a freelance architect. It sounds like you're unemployed. Each word had been a small cut. He hadn't fought back. He had simply absorbed it, believing that in time, his work, his success, the real success he kept hidden, would speak for itself. He had wanted her to love him for who he was, not for what he had. He was beginning to realize that had been a profound, perhaps fatal, miscalculation. Back in the restaurant, the air crackled with the aftermath of Clara's outburst. She had paid the bill with a flourish, her platinum card a gleaming statement of her superiority. The waiter, to his credit, handled the exchange with practiced neutrality, but Alex could see the flicker of pity in his eyes. It was worse than the contempt. Richard leaned forward, placing his thick, manicured hands on the table. He adopted the tone of a benevolent patriarch, delivering a difficult but necessary lesson. "Alex," he began, his voice oozing condescension. "Let's be honest, this thing you're doing, this freelancing, it's not working out. You have a wife to support, a lifestyle to maintain. Clara is accustomed to a certain standard, and frankly, you're not meeting it." Alex met his father-in-law's gaze. He did not speak. He simply listened, his face a calm, impassive mask. Inside, however, a switch had been flipped. The part of him that had been willing to endure, to wait, to hope, was shutting down. A new part was coming online, the part that ran a multi-billion-dollar global corporation. It was a part that was analytical, decisive, and utterly devoid of sentimentality when it came to bad faith negotiations. "You're a smart boy," Richard continued, mistaking Alex's silence for submission. "You just lack direction. You lack ambition. But that's fixable. I've been thinking. We have an opening in the planning department at Sterling Corp. Assistant project manager. It's an entry-level position, of course. You'd be reporting to a man half your age, but it's a foot in the door. A real job, a steady paycheck, health insurance." Julian chimed in, unable to resist twisting the knife. "Yeah, Alex, you'd get to see how real buildings get made, not just the pretty pictures you draw. You could learn a lot." Clara, instead of being horrified by the insulting offer, seized on it. It was a lifeline. A way to solve the Alex problem, a way to make him respectable. "Dad, that's a wonderful idea," she exclaimed, a desperate, brittle brightness in her voice. "Alex, isn't that perfect? You'd have a career path. We could finally be secure. You should take it. You have to take it." She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "Take the demotion. Take the insult. Be smaller so that I can feel bigger. Be what we want you to be." Alex slowly closed the leather notebook that was still on the table. The soft thud of the cover meeting the pages was the only sound he made. He looked at Clara, then at her father, then her brother. He saw the three of them, a united front of smug certainty, so utterly convinced of their own worldview that they couldn't see the abyss opening at their feet. They saw him as a problem to be solved, a piece on their board to be moved into a less embarrassing square. He had spent years building a firewall between his personal life and his professional one. He had created AuraPay under a pseudonym in its early days, building the company through a series of shell corporations and trusted proxies, precisely to avoid this. To avoid becoming a man defined by his net worth. He wanted a life, a wife, a family that was real, that was separate from the crushing weight of his success. He now saw that the firewall hadn't protected his life. It had only starved it of the truth. "Thank you for the offer, Richard," Alex said, his voice so quiet it forced them to lean in. "It's very generous. I'll need a moment to consider it." He stood up, his movements fluid and unhurried. "Excuse me." He walked away from the table, not toward the exit, but toward the grand, arched hallway that led to the restrooms. Clara watched him go, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. He was considering it. He was finally bending. Her father was right. All he needed was a firm hand. Richard chuckled, settling back in his chair. "See, he just needs to be shown the way. He'll come around." But Alex wasn't going to the restroom to weigh his options. He was going to end the negotiation. He pulled out his phone, a simple, nondescript model. He scrolled to a single contact, marked only with a single letter, N. He pressed the call button. It was answered on the first ring. "Nolan," Alex said, his voice low and clear, the quiet architect disappearing completely, replaced by the cool authority of a CEO. "It's me. We have a situation with the Sterling Corp account. Yes, that's Sterling Corp. I need you to pull up the contract we just finalized with them. Specifically, I want you to look at Appendix C, subsection 4A, the Vendor Integrity Clause. There was a pause as the man on the other end, his chief operating officer, Nolan Hayes, processed the unusual request at this late hour. Are you seeing it? Alex continued. The clause that gives us discretionary power to initiate a full-spectrum financial audit and place a temporary administrative hold on all transaction processing in the event of a perceived breach of good faith by their executive officers? I am now perceiving a significant breach. I want you to initiate the protocol immediately. And Nolan, send the notification to Richard Sterling's personal email, the one he uses for his board communications. I want him to see it personally. Yes, right now. He ended the call and stood for a moment in the quiet, marble-lined hallway. He could hear the faint murmur of conversation from the dining room, the distant clink of glasses. It was the sound of a world that was about to cease to exist for the three people at his table. He had not wanted this. He had never wanted to use his power this way. But they had mistaken his patience for permission. They had mistaken his humility for weakness. They had pushed, and now they had finally found the edge. He took a deep, steadying breath. The quiet architect was gone. Mr. Thorne was about to make his entrance. As Alex walked back toward the table, his demeanor had subtly shifted. The placid calm was still there, but it was no longer the calm of a peaceful lake. It was the calm in the eye of a storm. He felt a strange sense of clarity, the kind that comes after a momentous, irrevocable decision has been made. For years he had been playing a part, hiding a universe of himself from the person who should have known him best. The performance was over. He saw that Clara, Richard, and Julian were laughing about something, their heads close together in a conspiratorial huddle. They fell silent as he approached, their expressions a mixture of pity and expectation. They were waiting for his capitulation. "So," Richard said, steepling his fingers, "have you come to your senses, son? Ready to join the real world?" Before Alex could answer, a commotion erupted near the front of the restaurant. The maitre d', a man of impeccable, unflappable composure, was visibly flustered. He was speaking in hushed, urgent tones to a portly, well-dressed Asian man who had emerged from the back offices, wiping his hands on an apron. The man was Mr. Chen, the owner of L'Etoile d'Or, a notoriously reclusive figure who rarely appeared in the main dining room. Mr. Chen's eyes scanned the room, wide with panic. He spotted their table, and his expression shifted to one of profound, almost fearful, reverence. He hurried toward them, bypassing Richard's imperious gesture to summon him, and came to a stop not before the head of the table, but beside Alex. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep respect that was completely out of place in the modern Western setting. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "please accept my deepest, most sincere apologies. There was an error with our terminal, a security flag. I am so sorry for the inconvenience and the embarrassment. It will never happen again." The use of the name Thorne went unnoticed at first, lost in the sheer shock of the owner's deference. Richard stared, his mouth slightly agape. This was not the behavior of a restaurant owner toward a customer whose card had been declined. This was the behavior of a vassal toward his lord. "It's all right, Marcus," Alex said, his voice calm and reassuring. He addressed the owner by his first name. "I know it wasn't your fault. These security protocols can be overzealous. We are investigating it now," Mr. Chen stammered. The alert came from the highest level of Orapay's fraud division. They flagged the transaction as anomalous. A purchase of this size on a card that has been manually suspended by a third party. It triggered a lockdown on the entire terminal. They thought the system was under attack. Clara froze. The words, "manually suspended by a third party," echoed in her ears. Her petty act of revenge had not just embarrassed her husband, it had triggered a high-level security alert in a system she didn't understand. Julian, ever the opportunist, saw a chance to assert dominance. "What's all this about? And who is Mr. Thorne?" he asked, his tone brusque. "This man's name is Alex Croft." Mr. Chen looked at Julian as if he were a bug. Then he looked back at Alex, his expression pleading for permission to speak. Alex gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Alex Croft is the name he uses in his personal life," Mr. Chen explained, his voice gaining strength as he spoke a truth he clearly revered. "To the world, to the financial industry, to the entire digital economy, he is A.T. Thorne, the founder and CEO of OraPay." Silence. It was not a quiet silence. It was a deafening, roaring silence that sucked all the air from the space around the table. The name OraPay was not just a name, it was an institution. It was the ubiquitous payment system that powered nearly every transaction in the city, from coffee shops to corporate conglomerates. It was the revolutionary tech giant that had appeared seemingly from nowhere 5 years ago and conquered the world. It was a name whispered with awe in boardrooms and on stock market floors. Richard Sterling's face, usually ruddy with confidence and fine wine, turned a ghastly, waxy white. His company, Sterling Corp., had just spent the last 6 months in grueling negotiations to become a premier partner with OraPay, a deal that was supposed to modernize his aging empire and secure its future. The deal had been exorbitantly expensive and had come with a set of brutally strict terms and conditions, but his board had insisted it was necessary for survival. Clara felt a wave of vertigo so intense she had to grip the edge of the table. Her mind was a maelstrom of confusion, a frantic shuffling of disconnected puzzle pieces. Alex, her quiet, unambitious Alex, the man who seemed content drawing his little pictures in the spare bedroom, the man she had just pitied, scorned, and publicly neutered. A T. Thorne? It was impossible. It was absurd. And yet, the minimalist black card with the stylized A, the years of turning down lucrative but uninspiring work, his strange, detached calm in the face of her family's insults, the worn leather notebook he carried everywhere. As if on cue, Alex picked up the notebook. He didn't open it to a page of architectural sketches. He flipped it open to a section filled with complex flowcharts and lines of code, the foundational logic for OraPay's predictive transaction algorithm. He then turned to another page, showing a detailed organogram of a vast corporate structure, with holding companies in international divisions. At the very top, in a single isolated box, were the initials ATT. OraPay started as a side project, Alex said, his voice still even, but now carrying an undeniable weight of authority. A way to solve an architectural problem, how to build a seamless, secure, and elegant structure for financial transactions. It grew. He looked directly at Richard, his eyes holding no malice, only a profound and disappointing clarity. "The deal your company just signed, I oversaw the final negotiations myself. Your lawyers were good, but they were focused on the numbers. They didn't pay enough attention to the fine print, specifically Appendix C, subsection 4A. At that moment, Richard's phone, sitting on the table, buzzed. The screen lit up with an email notification. The sender was OraPay Corporate Compliance. The subject line was, "Urgent, notice of administrative hold and pending forensic audit." Richard stared at the screen, his hand trembling as he reached for it. He read the first few lines, and what little color was left in his face drained away completely. He looked up at Alex, his eyes wide with a terror Clara had never seen in her father. The titan of industry was gone. In his place was a scared old man. You can't," Richard whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "I can," Alex replied simply. "According to the contract your board unanimously approved, I can. The vendor integrity clause is quite clear. It's a standard feature of all our top-tier partnerships, designed to protect the stability of our network from the unpredictable behavior of our client's leadership. He paused, letting the words sink in. And tonight I perceived a significant and frankly embarrassing lack of integrity. The reversal was absolute. The power dynamic at the table hadn't just shifted, it had inverted with the gravitational force of a collapsing star. Seconds ago, Alex was the supplicant, the failure being offered a demeaning entry-level job. Now, he was the master of their universe, holding the fate of the Sterling family empire in the palm of his hand. Julian, who had been frozen in slack-jawed disbelief, finally found his voice. "This is a trick," he stammered, looking from Alex to Mr. Chen. "It's some kind of joke. You hired this guy to say this." Mr. Chen looked at Alex with an expression that said, "Do you want me to destroy him?" Alex gave a subtle shake of his head. He didn't need anyone else to fight his battles. Not anymore. He turned his attention to his wife. Clara was pale, her emerald dress suddenly looking garish and cheap. Her mind was racing, trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the titan of industry sitting before her. Every memory of the past 5 years was being recontextualized, every perceived weakness now revealed as a profound strength. His lack of ambition was the focus of a man building an empire in secret. His passivity was the patience of a predator who knew he was in complete control. His quaint hobbies were the work of a genius. She hadn't been married to a failure. She had been married to a king who had chosen to live in disguise among commoners, and she had treated him like a court jester. The shame was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. The humiliation she had felt when the card was declined was a pinprick compared to the gaping, mortal wound of this revelation. She had not only misjudged him, she had betrayed him in the most fundamental way. She had scorned his very essence. "Clara," Alex said, his voice softer now, but no less powerful. He wasn't speaking to the table anymore. He was speaking only to her. "When you canceled my card, you weren't just freezing an account. You were making a statement. You were saying that you had no faith in me, that you saw me as a liability to be managed." He leaned forward slightly. "For 5 years I have listened. I have listened to your father call my life's work playing with drawings. I have listened to your brother mock my firm in the spare bedroom. I listened when you told me that meaning doesn't pay the mortgage on a house that your father, not I, secured for us. I listened when you compared me to every shallow, vapid man who came before me, men whose only virtue was their family's name." He was not shouting. His voice was a measured, almost surgical instrument, laying bare the history of their relationship, every cut, every slight, every moment of casual cruelty. It was the list of grievances, delivered not with rage, but with the cold, hard finality of a judge reading a verdict. "I accepted a job offer at a prestigious firm in Zurich the year we got married," he continued, a new revelation landing with devastating impact. "Head of innovative design. It would have made me a very wealthy man, in terms your father would understand. I turned it down. I turned it down because you didn't want to leave your family, and because Orapay was just beginning to take off, and I wanted to build it here. I chose to stay, to work from home, to be present, because I thought that was what mattered. I built my company in the quiet, in the shadows, because I did not want its light to blind us. I wanted you to see me, Alex Croft, not A.T. Thorne." He paused, his gaze locking with hers. "But you never did. You were so blinded by the world you came from, you couldn't see the one I was building for us." The air was thick with the wreckage of their marriage. Richard and Julian were silent, paralyzed by the financial guillotine hanging over their heads. But Alex wasn't looking at them. His focus was entirely on Clara. "The card," he said, tapping the black piece of plastic on the table. "This is the Aura Black. It doesn't have a credit limit. It doesn't connect to a joint account. It is directly linked to the central treasury of the company. The message the waiter received, suspended by the primary user, was you. You are listed in the system as my wife, my partner, the only other person on Earth with level 1 administrative privileges. With a few taps on your phone, you could have transferred the entire liquid assets of the corporation to an account of your choosing. That is the level of trust I had in you. The implication was staggering. She hadn't just frozen his pocket money, she had held the keys to a global empire and had been completely, willfully ignorant of their power. Richard finally snapped out of his stupor. The fear for his company overwhelmed every other emotion. "Alex, Mr. Thorne, son," he stammered, his voice a pathetic, wheedling thing. "There has been a misunderstanding, a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea. We were just joking, ribbing you a little. It's how we are. It's family." "No," Alex said, cutting him off with cold precision. "It's not family. Family supports. Family encourages. Family respects. What you do is belittle, undermine, and control. You run your family like a hostile takeover, and you expect everyone to be grateful for a seat on a board you intend to dissolve." He looked at Richard's phone. "The administrative hold is temporary. A forensic audit will now commence on Sterling Corp's finances. My team is very, very good. They will find every irregularity, every hidden liability, every instance of creative accounting. The terms of our contract state that any financial discrepancies discovered will result in a penalty payable to Orapay of 10% of your company's total valuation." Richard looked like he was going to be sick. 10%. It would ruin him. It would gut the company and likely trigger a shareholder revolt. "Please," Julian begged. His slick smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of raw panic. "Alex, man, we're sorry, okay? We were jerks. We were completely out of line. Don't do this. It's my dad's whole life. It's my life." Alex regarded him with a look of profound disinterest. "Your life has been built on the foundation of your father's success. You have contributed nothing but arrogance. Perhaps it's time you learned what it feels like to build something of your own, from the ground up. In a spare bedroom, perhaps." The echo of Julian's own insult, delivered back to him with surgical precision, made him flinch as if struck. Alex then turned his full attention back to Clara. The chaos of her father's and brother's desperation faded into the background. There were only the two of them, sitting across the ruins of their shared life. "This isn't about them," Alex said, his voice softening once more, losing its corporate edge and regaining a hint of the man she thought she knew. "It's about us, about the fact that our marriage has been a lie, not because I kept a secret, but because you refused to see the truth that was right in front of you. You saw a project to be fixed, not a partner to be loved." Tears were now streaming down Clara's face, silent, hot tracks of shame and regret. Every cruel word she had ever said to him, every dismissive gesture, every exasperated sigh was playing back in her mind in a torturous loop. She had been so blind, so willfully, arrogantly blind. What now?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Alex didn't answer immediately. He looked out the large window of the restaurant, at the glittering lights of the city. A city that, in many ways, ran on the digital rails he had laid. "Now," he said, turning back to her, his eyes searching hers, "you have a choice. Not between me and them, not between my money and their money. That is the kind of transactional choice your father would understand. This is a choice about who you are. You can continue to be a Sterling, defined by status and appearances and the desperate need for the approval of men like him." He gestured vaguely toward her father. "Or you can decide to be Clara Thorne, a woman who must now build a life and a marriage on a foundation of honesty and respect. A foundation we would have to build from scratch, because it is clear that what we had was not real. He stood up. I will not be using my power to destroy your father's company. The audit will proceed. It will be fair, and it will be brutal. He will be held accountable for his finances, just as he tried to hold me accountable for mine tonight. The consequences will be proportional to his own actions. That is justice. He looked at Clara, his expression one of deep, abiding sadness. The choice is yours, Clara. I'm going home. You know the address. It will be up to you whether you still have a key that works. He placed a single, crisp $100 bill on the table for the waiter, a final, quiet rebuke to the spectacle of the declined card. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of L'Etoile d'Or, leaving behind 3 people suspended in the wreckage of their own making. The quiet architect had left the building, and in his place, A.T. Thorne had left an ultimatum that would redefine all of their lives. The days that followed were a blur of surreal, agonizing clarity for Clara. She did not go home with her father and brother. She watched them scramble, making frantic, whispered phone calls to lawyers and board members, their world collapsing in real time. She saw them not as the powerful titans she had always revered, but as they were, frightened, desperate men, stripped of their arrogance, their power revealed to be a fragile facade. She felt nothing for them, no pity, no loyalty. Alex's words had been a scalpel, cleanly excising them from her. She took a taxi, not to the grand house her father had helped them buy, but to a small, boutique hotel in a part of the city she barely knew. She needed neutral ground. She needed to think. For 2 days, she didn't leave the room. She ordered room service and stared at the wall, replaying her entire 5-year marriage in her mind. She remembered Alex, early in their relationship, trying to explain his work to her. He had sketched something on a napkin, a web of interconnected nodes. "It's about creating trust between strangers," he'd said, his eyes alight with passion. "A system so seamless and secure, it becomes invisible. It just works." She had smiled and nodded, but she hadn't listened. She had been thinking about what her friends would say about him, whether he would fit in at the country club. She remembered the countless nights he had worked late in his home office, the soft clicking of his keyboard, a familiar backdrop to the TV shows she watched. She had resented it, seeing it as him retreating from her, from their life. Now she understood. He wasn't retreating, he was building a world. He wasn't just working, he was conducting a global symphony of commerce from a spare bedroom. The depth of her failure to see him was fathomless. It wasn't just that she hadn't known about his wealth, it was that she hadn't known him. She had fallen in love with a quiet, gentle man, and then spent 5 years punishing him for being exactly that, all while he was quietly becoming one of the most powerful men in the world. The irony was so profound it was almost comical. She had been sleeping next to a king, dreaming of a prince. On the 3rd day she called him. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Hello, Clara," he said. His voice was calm, neutral. It held no anger, but also no warmth. It was the voice of a man waiting for a decision. "Alex," she began, her own voice a choked whisper. I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," he replied. "Just listen. The audit on Sterling Corp is underway. My team found significant discrepancies within the first 12 hours. Your father has been leveraging company assets for personal projects and hiding losses in offshore accounts for years. The penalties, as stipulated in the contract he signed, will be severe. He won't go bankrupt, but he will lose majority control of his own company. The board is already moving to replace him as CEO." Clara absorbed the information numbly. A part of her should have been devastated, but she felt strangely detached. It was as if she were hearing news about a distant country. "As for Julian," Alex continued, "his corporate accounts show a pattern of extravagant personal spending disguised as business expenses. He will be fired, and he will be expected to pay the money back. He will have to get a real job. Poetic justice. It was swift and mercilessly appropriate. I didn't do this out of revenge, Clara, Alex said, his voice softening slightly. Revenge is an emotional act. This was a simple matter of cause and effect. They built a house of cards on a cracked foundation. I just introduced a steady breeze. I know, she whispered. It's what they deserved. There was a long pause on the line. What about us, Alex? She finally asked, the question hanging in the air, fragile and heavy. Is there anything left? What do you think? He asked, turning the question back on her. What was real? I loved you. I believe that was real. I think in your own way you loved a version of me. The question is, can you love the man I actually am? Not A.T. Thorne, the CEO, and not Alex Croft, the failed architect you imagined, but the man who is both and neither. The man who hid his success not to deceive you, but to protect something he thought was precious. I was a fool, she said, the tears starting again. Hot and cleansing this time. I was arrogant and shallow and so blind. I looked at you and I didn't see you. I saw a reflection of my own insecurities. I am so sorry, Alex, for everything. It was the first time she had ever apologized to him, truly apologized. And in that moment, a tiny flicker of hope ignited within her. I'm at the Fairmont, she told him, room 812. She didn't know if he would come. She didn't know if he should. She had shattered his trust, the very thing his entire life's work was built upon. But she knew she had to make the choice he had offered her. She had to choose to be Clara Thorne. An hour later, there was a soft knock on her hotel room door. She opened it to find Alex standing there. He was dressed simply, in jeans and a soft gray sweater. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He was not carrying his leather notebook. They didn't speak for a long time. They just stood there, on the threshold of a new and uncertain beginning. The path forward would be long and difficult. It would require therapy, brutal honesty, and the slow, painful work of rebuilding trust from the ground up. Many of the pieces of their old life were broken beyond repair, but for the first time, they were both looking at the same reality. Months later, the world had settled into a new, unfamiliar shape. The downfall of Richard Sterling was a quiet affair, handled with the ruthless efficiency of corporate lawyers. He was eased out of his own company, his reputation tarnished not by a public scandal, but by the quiet, irrefutable numbers of an audit report. He retained a fraction of his wealth, enough to live comfortably, but his power, his influence, his identity as a titan were gone. He was a diminished man, haunted by the ghost of an empire he had lost, because he couldn't see the emperor sitting at his own dinner table. Julian fared worse. Stripped of his title and his trust fund, he was forced into the real world with a mountain of debt and a resume that was suddenly worthless. The last Clara heard, he was selling luxury cars, using the last vestiges of his slick charm to earn a commission. The relationship between Clara and Alex was a slow, deliberate reconstruction. They went to counseling, where for the first time, Clara spoke honestly about the pressures of her upbringing, the ingrained belief that a person's worth was tied to their net worth. And for the first time, Alex spoke of the loneliness of his secret, the burden of living a double life, and the deep wound her disbelief had inflicted. He never used his power to make her feel small. Instead, he started to share his world with her. He took her to the Orapay headquarters, a stunning building of glass and steel that he had, of course, designed himself. It was a masterpiece of light and space, a physical manifestation of his philosophy. He walked her through the server farms, the quiet hum of the machines, the heartbeat of his empire. He introduced her to his team, to Nolan, his fiercely loyal COO, and to the brilliant young minds who saw him not as a quiet architect, but as a visionary leader. Clara, in turn, began to build a life of her own. She went back to school, pursuing a degree in art history, a passion she had abandoned years ago because her father had deemed it impractical. She discovered she had a keen eye and a sharp mind, and she found a sense of self-worth that had nothing to do with her last name or her husband's bank account. Their grand house was sold. They moved into a beautiful but more modest home in a quieter neighborhood, a home Alex designed for them, filled with natural light and clean lines. It was a space built for two people, not for show. One evening, about a year after the dinner at L'Etoile d'Or, they were sitting on their new patio watching the sunset. Alex was sketching in a new notebook, this one for a charitable foundation he was starting to fund arts and education in underserved communities. "Do you ever miss it?" Clara asked quietly. "The power you could have had over them? You could have destroyed them completely." Alex looked up from his sketch, his expression thoughtful. "Destroying things is easy," he said. "It's loud and dramatic, and it leaves nothing but rubble. Building things is hard. It's quiet, and it takes patience. But you end up with something that can stand the test of time." He reached across the small table and took her hand. "I'm a builder, Clara. I always have been." She squeezed his hand, a feeling of profound, peaceful gratitude washing over her. She had lost a world of illusion, of status and silk dresses and her father's approval. But she had gained something infinitely more valuable. She had gained a partner, a man of quiet strength and deep integrity. She had gained a life built not on assumptions, but on the solid, unshakable foundation of truth. She finally saw him, all of him, and she finally understood that the greatest wealth he possessed had never been stored in a bank. It had been in his character all along. The story of Alex and Clara serves as a powerful reminder that we should never judge a book by its cover. True worth isn't measured in flashy cars or expensive dinners, but in character, integrity, and the quiet, consistent work of building something meaningful. It's a lesson in humility for those who believe they sit at the head of the table, and a source of hope for anyone who has ever felt underestimated. What do you think? Was Alex right to handle the situation the way he did, or was he too harsh? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more content just like this. Thank you for being here with me today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next story.